took over the Detroit public school system, literally abolished the existence of the Detroit elected school board through Public Act 10 in April of 1999. Took control of the bond money, and it's important, many of you again know this, but it's important to reemphasize. During those years prior to the takeover, the Detroit public schools enrollment was rising every year in the 1990s. The financial position was very strong with a $93 million net surplus in the finances, and the academic scores were rising. So all the things that they use as key indicators of a healthy district, enrollment, academic scores, financial conditions, were all positive, or were trending positive and continuous improvement. So all of us have concluded for years that they came in to loot the bond money, $1.5 billion, because English contractors weren't getting their cut. So that's pretty much, I think, considered a received history by now. But, you know, the first year, David Anamani, he just left Wayne State, took over as the CEO, which is what they call the superintendent and board position combined. And then Ken Burnley came in the following year and ran it. And for 6 years and 9 months, there was no elected school board in Detroit. They had this appointed board. They called it a reform board. We've called it other things. And they had, according to the Public Act 10, no power except to recommend the removal of the CEO, which means they had no power whatsoever. And to call them even a board is misleading, because a board sets policy. And they had no policy role. And we know that because many of us were going to them about specific issues, and they said, we have no authority, we have no power, and people quit going to those meetings. You know, I was an LSCO officer at that time, and my children's school, and Ken Burnley had taken over and had ordered demolition of a building that the school district had bought next to our building. They had not done the proper asbestos abatement, and they started it just as school started, and it filled with dust, you know, and you know how snow swirls on streets when it's blowing. That's what it was like inside the school. The air was a fog. The floors were with this asbestos-laden dust. And we cleared the school out. We refused to let our children go into school. We called all the parents to stay, put their kids in their cars in the parking lot and redeploy them. The school district refused to even take the calls of the LSCO, and that was the difference between the board model and the CEO model. They never answered a complaint or a response to the parents about what they did to them. They closed the building up, and after we got the Wayne County Health Department to come in and analyze the air conditions, and found they had medium levels of asbestos. The district never took responsibility for it. That's what it was like under CEO model. And they closed the school down. We came to school, all the children's properties, the teachers' properties were locked in the building, and nobody was ever allowed to go in and reclaim their property. And so teachers lost, in some cases, computers and thousands of dollars worth of personal items. They lost their clothing, coats, and so forth. And that was the CEO model. All dictation, no communication. They put in a corrupt principal. We put a book together like that on the corruption of the principal. He was promoted to another school over to Ludington, given a pay raise because he was a basketball buddy of Ken Burnley's. That was the CEO model. In 2004, a law was passed that created the referendum, which was Public Act 10 had a 5-year limiting date on it. Notice it took 6 years and 9 months to get out of that 5 years. But they had to have a referendum at that point. The law was changed to make the referendum over mayoral control versus elected board. And the Chamber of Commerce and Detroit Renaissance, as it was then called, now Business Leaders of Michigan, raised tons of money. They had several $1 million to run ads and run a campaign to convince us to not elect our own school board. And we had a grassroots campaign. A number of people in this room were part of that campaign. We were planting yard signs.
The court case.
Yes. But yeah, I didn't even cover the court case. You're right. There's so much history to tell on this. But Helen led the effort to file this court, and the court ruled that this was a pilot project, and they were allowed to do it.
Well, the court ruled that we had to right to vote. It was just a temporary thing, and that Cleveland had already been involved in it. And since we had the right to vote, we could come back here, and the people could vote and decide what to do. So the people came back here, and we did all that lobbying, and it was 67% of the people voted to have an elected board. And then 3 months later.
Right. We had thousands of dollars, they had millions of dollars, and that was an important lesson because it literally, as I said, we won that 2-1, despite a heavy propagandizing effort to discourage the board, and despite a governor who wanted to keep control over that bond program and didn't want to have an elected school board. And a few months later, having lost it, they put together a year-long task force, and they kicked the date. Even though we won this in November 2004, it didn't go into effect until January 2006. So another year before we had an election for a school board, and actually it took 15 months after that referendum for us to win. So they put together a study group on how we were going to make a better school district and all that sort of thing. I mean, Granholm thought she was buying off sympathy, support in the community by putting that together and making it like she supported us all along. Okay, jump forward real quick. 2006, 2007, and 2008, we had an elected school board. In March 2009, Granholm returned to form by appointing an emergency manager. March 2nd, 2009, Robert Bob. Selected Robert Bob on the recommendation of Eli Broad when they were together in Washington, D.C. for the president's inauguration.
Ron, can you talk about what the CEO model did for the surplus of $93 million? What did the
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. Every positive indicator that we talked about, the financial picture, the enrollment, and the academic scores, all went in reverse under the CEO model. The state of Michigan's model created a $200 million deficit. And the fact of its intentionality was made clear because the coalition of unions, the Detroit Federation of Teachers and others, put together a solution in December of '93 dealing with a projected $150 million deficit. And they said, here's how you can save $150 million. Ken Burnley would never acknowledge that he received this document, that it existed, or that a deficit existed. He waited till 2 months before the end of the fiscal year, April 2004, and said, we got a couple $100 million deficit. We've got to make radical surgery on the district. And that's when he put together massive school closings, thousands of teachers were laid off, and other employees and support staff. And that's when Granholm floated that $200-some million loan that was financed at a 50% finance rate, so that over a 20-year period we paid back $310 million for a $205 million loan. That was Granholm taking advantage of the situation again. I'm happy to be nonpartisan when it comes to education. And so that was kind of embedding the crisis in the district, and then the state used the excuse of the emergency the deficit as an excuse for the emergency manager. Granholm was saying to the elected school board that she never supported, you need to solve this deficit. Mike Flanagan was coming in, we need your deficit elimination plans and all this other stuff, and acting like it was the board's responsibility for what they created. And when they didn't get what they wanted, they said, well, you haven't solved the deficit, we have to put in an emergency manager, and that's what they brought Robert Bob in to do, who of course exacerbated the deficit. Robert Bob